We have gathered an esteemed panel of guests here. Let me introduce them to you. We have Bishop Zipho Zishle Siwa. He's the presiding bishop of the Methodist Church of Southern Africa and the president of the South African Council of Churches. Welcome. We've also got the visiting spiritual master from the East, Mohanji. Mohanji hails from an ancient lineage of saints and sages. Terry Oakley-Smith is the founder and CEO of Diversity. She's a pioneer in the South African diversity and change arena. Terry is also a former academic and a psychologist by profession. Very welcome to you. And in our SABC studios in Cape Town, Sheikh Ismail Kiran. He is the spiritual leader of the Al-Azhar Mosque in Cape Town. Welcome to one and all. Bishop, if I may start with you, I mean, South Africa is diverse, isn't it? It's widely diverse, it's widely unique. We talk about race, we talk about culture, traditions, gender issues, and not to mention the socioeconomic issues that we have in this country. In this climate, is social cohesion even possible?
The first thing that we need to acknowledge is that that diversity is a positive diversity. It affords us an opportunity to interact for the better. There's just so much goodness in the country. If we can focus on that. The good people, the old, the young, and anywhere, any age we have. Actually, we are a very young country, a young democracy as well, and opportunities are ahead of us. Yes, you are correct that at the moment there are very serious challenges in terms of poverty and inequality, but also in terms of gender-based violence, which is a terrible thing that we are facing at the time. And also the fear of some of the topics that are in the agenda right now, like land redistribution. I'd want to lift it higher and say, instead of expropriation without compensation, and say fair land distribution and just land reform.
Yeah. Land, a big issue. I don't know if you had a chance to watch some of the testimony yesterday at the Gender Summit. It was real, it was raw, it was palpable. You know, you can get the sense of hurt that really cut deep. Bishop, when you listen to things like that, I mean, does it give you hope that we can overcome this?
As long as we are open to talk about it and create an environment where people are able to come forward, because gender-based violence is a complex thing. It happens behind closed doors where nobody is watching. And so when an opportunity like yesterday, that people were encouraged to come forward and talk, and also if we can have special courts, you remember the case in Port Elizabeth?
Yeah.
Where the young lady was grilled in a way that is discouraging other people to come forward and speak, because it's like she's being raped again.
It's almost like a secondary trauma, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
Mohanji, this is not endemic to South Africa. It's a worldwide issue, gender issues, violence against women. Also, we see the big news item internationally is the attacks on the synagogue in the United States. How do you stop the hate parade around the world? I mean, how do you lessen the tension and increase the peace?
I believe that we need to address the source. Everything has a history. No activity happens in an isolated way. The usual progression is first it happens in the thought level, then it happens as an expression like speaking or writing, then it becomes an incident. Now we're talking about incidents mostly. There is always a history for this. So we need to address from the thought level. There is a lack of contentment factor, or a greed factor is very high. For me, I always feel that the goodness factor, which Bishop rightly said in the beginning, there is always a positivity which we grossly ignore every time. Or nobody is bad in this world. The circumstances make them act in a particular way, and then we call them a criminal. So we brand them. Then they can't get out of it. Like that, we are creating criminals in the world. Instead, if we address in the thought level, that is the psychological level, we can turn around everything. First of all, the goodness factor. What have you given to this country? fundamental question. I said the same thing in Brazil. I said, have you given anything to your country all these years, right from your birth till now? Instead of rights, have you thought about responsibilities? So that the whole change in the thought process is essential from school level. And then we bring up people who are valuable to the society. Your net worth is what you are delivering to the country, not what you have taken from the country. Whatever we take from here, we leave behind when we die. Yeah. But what you contribute into this country stays on as your legacy. So this point, if it's missed, no peace is possible.
Yeah. So it's a ground-up approach. Terry, you agree with that in terms of your experience? You've been, delving into this issue for many, many years. I mean, South Africa is a diverse nation, but we should be celebrating this diversity, isn't it? Are we?
I think part of the problem lies in our history, and I agree with what both the gentlemen have said before me. I think we have such a terrible history, and the legacy of that history in terms of inequality, in terms of terrible poverty, is still with us. And I think, the child that's brought up in a one-room shack with a single parent and nothing to eat is going to find it very difficult to be able to give back to his or her country. I think that we need, as South Africans who care about these things, to work on a very broad front. We need to work in schools, we need to work in tertiary institutions, we need to work in businesses. But we're also hamstrung by the apartheid spatial geography. I mean, how many South Africans do we know that are sitting here like we are today, and also with our fellow in Cape Town? It happens so rarely. We just don't know one another. There's so little same status contact between South Africans. We still tend to cluster in our little groups where we feel comfortable with people like us. So I think a major challenge for us is to, and this is where I think the churches can play a significant role, is to bring people together. Whether it's a mosque, whether it's a temple, whether it's a church, we need to be preaching the need for us as South Africans to get together.
I mean, we're still grappling and dealing with the legacies of apartheid, as you've mentioned. Let me bring in Sheikh Kiran in Cape Town. Sheikh, I mean, South Africans know all too well the sting of bigotry, the sting of discrimination, the sting of sexism. What do we need to do in order to stay on the path of decency? How do we create civility?
First, thank you for having me, Herman. First and foremost, we have to recognize what the problem is. And in my view, I totally agree with the speakers before me who so eloquently sort of outlined the whole scenario. Our problem is that we have to admit that we are living not in a cohesive society, but in a dislocated, totally unbalanced society. And this has, in terms of the narrative of our society, we come from a legacy of colonialism, we come from a legacy of apartheid, and this has infused deep, deep structural walls of division. If we want to put it even in theological terms, we even have these deep theological walls separating us. And until such time, as Alvin Toffler, the philosopher, said, until such time we start to redesign, re-engineer a visionary, vibrant, critical and reflective educational system where we teach from young that illiteracy in the present 21st century, as Alvin Toffler said, it is not going to be people who cannot read and write, but it's going to be people who refuse to learn, who refuse to unlearn, and refuse to relearn. And therefore, so quite rightly as the last speaker said, the places of worship, they must really come to the party here. We must reinterrogate our thinking, reinterrogate our interpretations and perceptions of scriptures, of the socio-economic, political and geopolitical landscape to really infuse in South Africa a system of education where the diversity is celebrated as a gift from the Almighty and not as a gift from colonialism.
Sheikh, you just recently returned from the Congress of Leaders that was held in Kazakhstan. What stood out for you? What sort of aspects did they deal with? And what sort of triggers did they find that triggers hate around the world?
Yeah. Firstly, the Congress in Kazakhstan, as I said to you that time, it was awesome to see people, religious scholars of the Jewish denomination, the Iranian denomination, sitting around a table discussing. I mean, that was so heartwarming and hopeful. And what has come, what I take from that conference is there is hope. It is only that if we, the scholars of theology, if we can reinterrogate our perception of the scriptures, move away from a literalist approach, look at the context in which we are in this the 21st century, and then according to our culture, wherever we are in the world and languages, design, reconstruct an educational system. And here I do not mean an educational system in the narrow sense of the school sense, but holistically, universal. And what I see from that conference is that we can live together and recognize humanity on this planet, not as I'm a Muslim, you're a Christian, you're a Judaism and or Buddhist or whatever, but as one universal family.
Yeah.
That is going to take a lot of work, but I think that is the challenge for us in this 21st century if we really want to make the earth a place of peace.
Terry, what are some of the barriers to peace in South Africa?
I think I've already mentioned our history, and I've already mentioned the fact that we don't know each other. We still kind of cling to our own little groups. So I think those are some of the key barriers, as well, obviously, as poverty, inequality, and those things that we see. I mean, as a white person, I was at a funeral in an Eastern Cape village this weekend, and just to be reminded again of the terrible grinding poverty that the majority of our people live under. So until we address the economic problems, I think it's very difficult to get to the social cohesion problems. But I think again that if we look at where we are together, church is one, school is one, business is one. I think the business community can play a much more significant role than they are so far doing. If they were to put together the time for people to actually have the opportunity to meet together, to talk together, to share ideas together, I think that could make a huge difference. NGOs obviously have a huge role to play in that regard as well. But it's about getting South Africans to bust the barriers that keep us apart and to actually reach out to one another in places where we find each other. And if those places don't exist, then we need to create them, one-to-one. As the gentleman on my right said, to find the goodness in another person, even if we don't know him or her.
Mohanji, I mean, trying to get a cohesive and united society is very difficult when you're grappling with poverty, isn't it? Social cohesion is the furthest from anyone's mind who's trying to put bread on the table, isn't it?
It is. If I do not know the history of South Africa as much as Terry said or Bishop Siwa said, but I remember one thing which I quote in many countries wherever I go. When Nelson Mandela came out of prison, he said there should be no revenge. Correct me if I'm wrong. So the setting the trend was absolutely right. Maintaining is always difficult. Whatever you start to maintain is very difficult. So we already know that the trend or the precedence was already set. Now, the taking it forward, it needs a unification of the government and the non-government together, including celebrities. Actually, I feel that more than people who follow religions or faith, people listen to celebrities.
Yeah. Yeah.
They have a better hold on people than many of us. So this should be a movement, not a discussion stuff. And activity should come with influential people. It could be businessmen, powerful people who could support as they like, as they can. Then the celebrities takes it forward, so that fundamentally everybody has food to eat and place to sleep. There we begin the show. Then we can turn them around into what are you now giving to this earth.
Celebrities, business people notwithstanding, Bishop, what about political leaders? I mean, what you give attention to, you fuel, isn't it? So if you push peace, that's what's going to happen, isn't it?
One of the things that we need to realize is that political leaders of political parties don't own the political parties. The political parties are an asset of the nation, of the citizens. So we've got this mistake of saying that if somebody is elected to a position, that person will do everything for us. They are the servants of the people. So what is needed is active citizenry, people who care about the things that we're dealing with, and also who hold the political leaders accountable to say, this is what the citizens want. And secondly, as my colleagues here have correctly said, we need to create spaces where we showcase what can be. Yes, there is fear of there's also what is called paralysis of what has happened to us. But also there is also fear. There is an ideology of scarcity. Those people who have the resources are scared that something is going to be taken from them. And yet God has created so much that it can be shared. And those who have an opportunity seem to be wanting to take and take and take and take. So if we create spaces where we showcase what can be, where those who have can share their resources in a way, as Terry has correctly said, business, schools, churches, and churches themselves, actually not churches, the religious communities need to be seen to be working together. We are not in competition here. We're working towards what is good for both the people and creation. So
what I'm getting from you, Bishop, is that good people need to stand up, isn't it? To paraphrase Martin Luther King, I think he said, the silence of good people is worse than the actions of bad people, isn't it? So we need to step up.
Of course, we need to step up, and we don't have to wait for everybody. Few people who can stand up, as Maharaj said that, and say, these are the role models. These are the people who can promote what is good and be seen to be actively engaged.
Sheikh, what's your take?
You know, you quoted Martin Luther King there, you know, and added to that, I would just like to quote Paulo Freire, the Brazilian educationist, you know, who said, you know, in terms of the political dispensation in Brazil at that time, he said that people were moving into a dead silence, you know, and of course a dead consciousness. And I think that comes from fear, as he explained. And probably that is also what is prevalent in our South African society. People has become numbed to violence. People has become numb to corruption. And this fear psychosis that has gripped the society, that has caused this dislocation, is actually the stumbling block that we cannot move forward. And also within that, you find the survival instinct of the human being, that primordial survival instinct coming to the fore, where we find today the basic manner of satisfying hunger is being turned to greed. Thirst has been turned to bloodthirstiness, and do we not have enough of that? And of course, as we see, the manner of procreation has been turned into fornication. And all this is coming together, or has come together, to produce the mess that we are in. But there's hope. And I do think that our religious spaces, your mosques, your churches, your synagogues, our schools, they must become by a visionary educational system, the receptacles and incubators for the revival of goodness, peace, and integrity and decency, so that we can build a society of cohesiveness based upon true peace. And I just want to add also the two ingredients of sincerity, because if we're not going to approach this with sincerity, we might as well stop right here. The two basic ingredients of sincerity is to inculcate into ourselves first, and then into the learners and whoever, the concept or the manner of being truthful and, of course, to be trustworthy.
Yeah.
Once we start embarking on that road into the spaces, wherever the spaces are, in business, in schools, in religion, whatever, then hopefully we will be on the right path.
Terry, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I was interested in what you said about Martin Luther King and what the Sheikh also said about fear, because he also said men hate each other because they fear each other. They fear each other because they don't know each other. They don't know each other because they can't communicate with each other, and they can't communicate with each other because they're separated from each other. And that's the story of South Africa. And what the Mahinji said about Nelson Mandela, Tata Mandela, you know, the saddest thing is he did reach out the hand of reconciliation, but very few of us, I'm talking about white people, were prepared to take that hand and really make reconciliation something meaningful. Instead of being prepared to be reconciled, as you said, Bishop, we were all too keen to hold on to what we had, to make sure that we weren't going to share it with anybody. And I think only now is it beginning to dawn on many organizations, I'm thinking of things like AfriForum, that actually unless we share, there'll be nothing for anybody, including ourselves.
Mohanji, stop living in insular societies. I guess that's key, isn't it? Branch out, learn about your neighbor, learn about your friend at work who's different from you, from a different race. Go to a braai from a different race group, you know.
Go to Diwali on Wednesday.
Go to Diwali on Wednesday. I mean, it's just about knowing your fellow being, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And then by knowing your fellow being, you eradicate the ignorance about the person, the race, the culture, the tradition.
Sure. Like yourself said and Sheikh said, we have learned to be indifferent because we have a feeling we can't do anything. That's a kind of resigned feeling. Mostly when we talk to people, that's oh, I can't do anything. This is much bigger than me. But we are all part of the society, 7.5 billion out there. They are all human beings, and they are all able to change the course of the history of not only this country, every country. We have two ways we can respond to this society. One is the anger, hatred, greed, jealousy, that path, which is very low in frequency, which is what we see. The other is compassion, kindness, love, unconditional love, tolerance, and that frequency, which is quite high. So between these frequencies, everybody is sitting. All people exist in between these two frequencies. So our effort as not just spiritual people or spiritual leaders, or this is for everybody. This is for the universe, for the whole world. All people have a responsibility to make sure that the frequency is that of compassion, kindness, love, sharing, giving, which is exactly what Bible spoke. Every religious book spoke, and Jesus stood for it. All the masters who led the mankind stood for it. We have to reinvent it right now. It is time now. We only see news of sorrows. We see sad news all the time. If you look at the newspaper, I don't read the newspaper now because there is nothing to read. It's either about rape or killing somebody or burning something, and that's a story. So what people feel is that there's no hope anymore. It's finished. Now we are just waiting for the death. Instead we should revive the hope and say that it's you. You are complete by yourself as an incarnation. You are never high nor low nor equal. You are unique. So this idea should actually reach people, and that should not be just through spiritual organizations, churches, temples, or mosques. It should be through anybody who's anybody in this world.
Bishop, you agree?
Yes, I do agree, exactly. But we must not forget that what is uppermost in people's mind is that people don't have food. They don't have living space. I mean, you mentioned being in the rural villages out in the Eastern Cape. You go to the informal settlements, you go to the townships. People live on top of each other.
Yeah.
And when they wake up in the morning, they come and work in these spacious suburbs where there's one person living in this huge house. What happens in the mind of that person? And at the end of the day, that person walks back to where he will live on top of each other, children growing there. Yeah. Those are the issues that need to be addressed towards social cohesion, because that brings about anger, frustration, hatred, because why should I be contained in this space? Why should I be not having food when there's a display of wealth everywhere? You walk outside of this building, you'll see posh cars driven and people walking and watching this. That is a dangerous thing. The space for those who have is going to shrink if it is not addressed. And that is what we should be holding, as you correctly said, business, government, civil society, to hold them accountable, to say you've got to do something about this.
Sheikh, are you having similar experiences in Cape Town when you talk to people down there? I mean, when they're grappling with poverty issues, how do you tell them to get on board the social cohesion train, you know? I mean, who should take responsibility of bringing people together?
Yeah. You know, what the bishop said there is so very true about the spaces, you know, and the crampedness and so forth. And yes, when we do speak to people down here in Cape Town, you know, it's the same story because, you know, poverty knows no boundaries. It's universal. If people are subjected to a situation or condition where they are dehumanized, you know, you're going to get a response of violence. And I just want to touch on this. What we see in societies all over the world and governments, including in South Africa, I like to sort of divide it into two types of violence. The first one is what we say institutionalized violence. In other words, if you subject people willfully to spaces like that, if you subject people by means of a policy where the rich gets richer and the poor gets poorer, the poverty chasm gets wider and wider, you're going to get problems. So that's what I would call the institutionalized violence of grabbing by means of greed and so forth, capitalizing on the weak. And what do you expect in return? What we see today, whether it's in South Africa or whether it's wherever in the world, you see the other type of violence, and that is the responsive violence, where people have no other recourse. Rationality is not working, therefore reason is not working. In other words, nice words is not working. I have to go back to my primordial instinct to fight this, and that is the responsive violence. And usually, the responsive violence are then portrayed as being savage, as being out of order and barbaric. But what about the institutionalized violence, which is camouflaged by governmental structures and so forth, which is actually the cause of how the nation has been governed, whether it's here or whatever. And these are the hard questions that we have to interrogate if we really want to become a cohesive society and move forward. Thank you.
Terry, unity is hard won and easily lost, isn't it? Let's get your last thoughts.
I think my last thoughts are, I've spent a lot of time outlining all the difficulties inherent in South Africa becoming unified. But I want to go back to maybe what the Mahinji said, that we all are unique human beings. And even if we feel we're not making any difference, I still think we have a responsibility in our own sphere of influence to try and reach out, to try and promote reconciliation, to try and give to the poor and the hungry, to help people with education, and just to do the best we can as individuals.
Mahanji?
I fully agree with it. We have responsibility and we should do it. And it's always the most powerful expression is life. We have to live it. We can't preach, we can't tell anything, because people are expecting us to be adhering to what we believe in, and then we should live our truth, and that's the best message to the world.
Live our truth, Bishop?
Oh, definitely. I think living it out more than talking about it is crucial, so that people can see that there is good. But also, we need people who will step up and mobilize society to be intolerant of corruption, intolerant of violence, particularly gender-based violence, in an active way. Sometimes we tolerate these things to our own detriment. I think stepping up, I agree.
Sheikh, you know, talking about peace and being at peace is a big difference, isn't it? Your last thoughts?
Yeah. My last thoughts, I want to have two quotes, or give two quotes. And firstly, I would say, we all accept that we come from a singularity. We all are from Adam, and Adam is from clay. And therefore, we are one big universal human family. That we have to understand and accept as fact. And secondly, a condition of a people will not be changed until we make the effort to change it ourselves. And if we, as our responsibility as human beings, as humanity on this planet and in this day and age, if we do not chip away, continue in hope, and try to fulfill our responsibility, we will then be in danger of turning ourselves, humanity in the 21st century, into 21st century machines and dehumanize ourselves. So the hope is there, because we have to cling onto our humanity, and under whatever circumstances, we have to fulfill and chip away at our responsibility. Thank you.
Sheikh, Bishop Siwa, Mahanji, and Terry, we thank you very much indeed for your time as well as your insight.